Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, I'm once again delving into one of my favorite little areas of cinematic history, the Universal monster films. This is an entry from the second wave, The Mummy's Hand from 1940. While I've known about this film for years, this is actually my first time watching it. And I have to say, on the whole, I did enjoy it. I will say that the Karloff film is better, and I'm going to be honest, I would probably want to watch the Brendan Fraser-led remake from 1999 before I pop on this one. But for an action-adventure film from the 1940s, in the second wave of the series, which is where, if I'm going to be honest, the quality of a lot of the films started to go down and started to become more about entertainment than art. With that in mind, it is still an entertaining film, and it does straddle the line pretty well of being entertainment and art. It leans more into the entertainment side, but hey. And in that regard, I guess you could say it is a little bit more entertaining than the Karloff one, but that's going to depend on what type of mood you're in. Like, if you're in the type of mood where you want to sit there and watch a film and go with the popcorn, yeah. If it's a film where you want to be entertained, intrigued, and watch a good story, then there's the Karloff one. Now, the second wave of the Universal Horror series, it's weird in another way besides the fact that the quality of film started to go downhill, and it kind of connects with it. And that is continuity. Now, this is more from a modern lens, because back then, where you have to actually watch a film in the theaters, and as many others have said, if you've missed the film, you missed the film. The studios didn't seem to care much about continuity compared to nowadays. Like, if you did stuff like this nowadays, you'd have people online going, oh my god, can you believe the studios did this? I mean, we have fans complaining about little bits of continuity or retcons that Disney, Paramount, and all the other studios do. You imagine if something like this happened? If they did it on this level, they'd be complaining on the chat boards and on YouTube videos like this up the wazoo. It would be insanity. But of course, you can look at this as the sequels being loose, the continuity being loose, and as James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd, put it in one of his Universal monster film reviews, that they're half sequels, half reboots. That you could put each one is set in its own separate universe, like the universe next door. Now, to that end, Mummy's Hand kind of falls into this, but it's not as bad as, say, like some of the Frankenstein ones where you're like, what the heck's going on here? Here, the continuity for the most part between the four films of the Kharis line are pretty strict. It's only with the last one that we get a jump, but it does keep it a little fresh, but we'll get to that when we get to that film. Here, it's like the universe next door because of the use of stock footage from the original film, which of course is in keeping with the mantra of the time when it comes to Universal and them constantly reusing footage. Why restage and reshoot something we already have in the can? Which of course is not unusual for studios to do that. I mean, look at Disney. They, over the decades, have constantly repurposed animation for use in other films, and I think at times they still do that nowadays. Maybe not so much anymore, considering they have to use computers, but I wouldn't be surprised if they reuse assets. I mean, look at everybody when they went crazy when they saw the Tangled models for the first time in forever in Frozen. They were like, oh my god, hey, could mean something, could mean nothing. Reused assets. The plot of the film is that it takes place in modern day, where we see a group of archeologists trying to find something that will make them a lot of money. Mainly our two lead characters, Steve, who's played by Dick Foran, and Babe, played by Wallace Ford. They have a good back and forth, and they come off as, another thing that James Rolfe said about them, they're like a poor man's version of Abbott and Costello. And you could find the routine funny, you might not. It becomes a trio when Cecil Kellaway's character Solvani comes in. And this is where some of the humor might be a little up your alley, might not, because Solvani is a magician, and the only reason he's written as a magician is to throw some sleight of hand humor in there. It's cheap, but it's entertaining, and I'm always a sucker for a good bit of sleight of hand, and there it was good. They managed to get Solvani to fund their expedition. His daughter, played by Peggy Moran, does not like the fact that her father got money tricked out of him, thinking that they're just going to do the old, yeah, come on, sign here, yes, we'll fund it. Is he gone? Run! But they actually are serious. They want to get the expedition funded, and she decides, yeah, what the heck, I'll go along for the ride. Now, they have actually found something. They have found the tomb of the Princess Ananka. But they've also stumbled onto danger in the form of the long-dead Kharis, who, like his Karloff counterpart, was condemned for attempting to resurrect somebody, but whereas Imhotep was buried alive. Seriously, Kharis was put to be buried alive, but then taken away somewhere else. And of course, he is controlled by the High Priest, played by George Zucco, who is a mainstay in some of these Universal horror films from this period. He was in House of Frankenstein, The Mad Ghoul, Cat and the Canary. You'll see his face pop up, but it's not like some of the other people like Lionel Atwill and Dwight Fry, who always seem to play the small ones. He seems to play like a supporting role that has a little bit more impact on the plot. Our main characters have to deal with Kharis and the High Priest and somehow survive all of this. And with luck, they might be able to get away with some treasure in order to salvage all this. There's going to be bullets fired. There's going to be mummies walking, staggering, taking the girl. And everything will be wrapped up nice and neat. I'm not going to give any major spoilers about that. I mean, the film is 80 years old. 81, actually. But I still don't want to spoil it, because I think this is one of those Universal films that you should watch. Kharis, if there's any surprise about his character, is he wasn't in the film as much as I thought he was going to be, from how I've heard him been talked up in reading reviews and watching James Rolfe's Monster Madness. I thought he'd be in it a little bit, even if he was only in the background. But surprisingly, he's not. And of course, I expected him to just pop up in the third act and start doing this thing, and he did. And Tom Tyler, who is mainly known for westerns and of course playing Shazam / Captain Marvel in The Adventures of Captain Marvel, he does a decent job as Kharis. I mean, he doesn't have any dialogue, and the only time you properly see his face is in the reshot footage that they spliced in between the Karloff stock footage. But he does a decent job playing it. And I do like this little added detail they put on him. And that is that they blackened out all his eyes and all the close-ups. It makes him more frightening and gives Kharis a little bit more of a supernatural vibe. Now, they didn't do it in the distant shots, but for those ones it kind of makes sense because you're not seeing his eyes clearly. And like with Karloff, Jack Pierce applied the cotton to his face to give him that weird little make cotton wrinkle effect, but he only did it for the close-ups. I did not know that. I thought he did it to make up the entire thing, but I guess when they were just doing a day of wide shots, they used a rubber mask, which of course is in contrast to what they would do with Lon Chaney in the fourth of these films, where the entire thing, I guess, was a rubber mask. Did kind of save on time at the cost of how well it looked. But I guess for the long shots, you can't really tell. I didn't really notice a difference in it, but I guess that's a difference in how the shots were. And of course, unlike Karloff, you actually see Kharis in mummy gear the entire time. I mean, I know that's a picture of Karloff on the front, but going to the back, you see there's Tom Tyler. That's how he looks the entire film. So if you are expecting a mummy to be walking around with bandages, this is a film where you're going to get a mummy walking around in bandages. Tying back in, of course, to my earlier comment about stock footage for the film, the set that they used for Ananka's tomb was not built for this film. It was a stock set that was originally built for Green Hell, and Universal used it in other films. I guess they figure, we already got the set, might as well get the mileage out of it, which is a common thing you'll see off and on throughout film history, but it makes sense. I mean, if you already got the set, why demolish it? You could always repurpose it and use it in other films. And there's other sets that I see in movies that'd be like, it'd be interesting to see this set used in another movie too, save a little bit of money. But alas, most of the time, once the set's done, it goes. And the desert scenes where they were digging were shot on the Universal backlot in an area called Gosman's Gulch, which is named after the film's set director, Russell. And of course they augmented it with some artificial rock faces and boulders to make it look a little bit more like the desert. You'll see them do that a lot when they're filming locally, try to make it look like it's the area, not like Southern California. Even though in certain instances you're like, hey, wait a minute, I know that. Such as all the film appearances of a certain cave in Griffith Park. You guys know which one I'm talking about. It's the one that West went through after he slid down the bat pole. As I've already mentioned, there is humor in this film and there is action. There is a little bit of horror involving with the mummy staggering around, killing people, and of course the spears that they showed in the flashback, even though the more graphic parts of that scene are edited out. Because unlike when Karloff's film was released in 1932, the Hays Code was in effect, and they would take their scissors to it. I mean, that's part of the reason Dracula and Frankenstein had certain scenes edited out and edited down in their re-releases that were only fixed years later for various reasons. Now, to that end, I have to second James Rolfe with one point he's made about this film, and that is you can consider this to be a progenitor of the slasher film. Now, hear me out on this. While it doesn't have a lot of the tropes that later slasher films did, you know, the final girl, all that, those would not come until years later because, you know, the actual grandfather of the slasher film that is most recognized is Psycho from 1960. And then, you know, we had Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Black Christmas, Halloween that set the template even more. And then the 80s was the golden age of slasher films. But Kharis, with how he's written in this film, he is a progenitor of the slasher film killer. Silent killer, moves slowly, there is a body count, and this is going to be something that is going to be applied more to the sequels, but you can apply it a little bit here. No matter the circumstances, he always manages to chase and corner his victims and kill them, even if the fact he's able to do so goes towards the implausible. And that is usually something with slasher films you find in later entries in the series, like when the killer seems to start to be able to teleport for no reason whatsoever. I'm actually surprised that other film buffs and cinephile... This is a point I'm actually surprised other film historians and cinephiles haven't really brought up as much. Or maybe they are and I just haven't really found the right circles or works to see this little thing brought up. But even if the film series as a whole isn't given that status, the character of Kharis should. It should go his characterization, Psycho, 70s ones, Golden Age. There we go. As a whole, that tone that I mentioned before, the horror, it doesn't really clash with the horror that well. I mean, it seems balanced in a way. Which film's only a little bit over an hour, so it's kind of hard to really clash a tone that well. It's just whether or not you find the humor funny, and then get invested in the adventure element, and then whether the horror aspect spooks you. Which, considering how many decades it's been since this film came out, that part might be a little harder unless you watch this type of movie at a certain time. I mean, age-wise. But if you could put your mind into the 1940s standard of what they were, you could kind of see why some might get a little scared by it. But with all I've seen, even doing that, it's a film I enjoy more for the action and adventure aspect, and of course a little bit of the humor. But I can still say the creepiness of the horror aspect of it involving the character Kharis still does work. And part of that is the aforementioned effect on the eyes. And also the way that the director sets up the shots and it's edited together. Plus that score, they all come together, create a mise en scène. They're like, oh yeah, that's effective. And, of course, the way this is wrapped up at the end. Not going to give any spoilers, but it gives this film the ending it deserves. And if they hadn't gone around to making the 3 sequels, probably wouldn't have missed much. It definitely gets the Mar recommendation. Now, if you have watched the Karloff film and you're not really a big fan of it, I still say give this one a watch, because this film's tone might be a little bit more up your alley, especially if you are a fan of the Brendan Fraser one, because when they did that film, this seems to be the film that they drew the tone inspiration from, even if the mummy in that film is named after Karloff's film.